So no matter how much political systems evolve, no matter how much culture evolves or differs across time and space, there's a psychological core to the difference between the left and the right, and that, of course, explains why it occurs again and again and again. There's always a left and there's always a right. And to show this across time, let's go back to the French Revolution, which is when the terms left and right were first actually used to define political differences based upon where people sat in one of the many assemblies that they had during the French Revolution as it got worse and worse. And there were many assemblies. All right? But on the left were people who wanted to overthrow the ancien regime, and on the right were people who wanted to preserve the ancien regime. So right there, left and right are associated with friendliness towards versus aversion to change. All right? And this is an openness difference. And so here we have the man, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who some said was the cause of the French Revolution. Now, I think that's a little bit of an exaggeration. Okay, but Rousseau, with his ideas of the social contract and the general will, clearly provided a lot of fuel to the idea that you could have a system where you could overthrow entrenched power and actually have something springing up from the people. Okay? So who was this guy? He was a liberal in the 18th century. All right? And Carlyle described his personality in terms that clearly show this. He said of Rousseau, he could be cooped into garrets. He could be laughed at as a maniac. He could be left to starve like a wild beast in his cage, but he could not be hindered from setting the world on fire. All right? That's a liberal. That's an open personality at the time of the French Revolution. Now, a contemporary of Rousseau and someone that the free thought movement we all really greatly respect, Thomas Jefferson, noticed this very thing about people. It was the Whigs and the Tories back then, but this is what he said. He said, the same political parties which now agitate in the U.S. have existed through all time. And in fact, the terms of Whig and Tory, which we would call liberal and conservative today, belong to natural as well as civil history. They denote the temper and constitution of mind of different individuals. Science is just confirming this stuff, a couple centuries later. Now, the reason I think this is important, it suffuses everything in politics and also everything in religion, by the way. But for my purposes, why it's important is that openness or the lack of openness beats a straight pathway towards understanding conservatives denying science, denying facts, denying reality. So in the research literature, it's very clear that openness is inversely related, is the opposite of a trait called the need for cognitive closure. The need for closure is the need to have a definite answer to something so that you can stop thinking about it. All right? So you don't have to deal with ambiguity anymore. You have certainty and you crave it and you get it. And if you have a high need for closure, then what you do is something called seizing and freezing. All right? You find some piece of information, you seize on it, and you freeze on it, and then you don't have to worry about it anymore. And so you're defensive, and you don't search for as much information, and you close around a belief, and when someone attacks the belief, then you defend it. You backfire. You defend it even more strongly, like you're defending yourself. All right? There's been a study of anti-evolutionists showing that they score higher on need for closure. On global warming, Tea Party members are not only the most in denial of the fact that it's caused by humans, but they say they're very sure of themselves. They say they don't need any more information on the issue. These are the kind of people you're dealing with. At the extreme of low openness, you find a character, and high need for closure, you find a character called an authoritarian. Right? And we've all heard the word. It's a very pejorative term. It really does seem to, there's a huge body of research on it. It does describe a very strong form of conservative personality. So what's an authoritarian? I think that if you're going to give them a motto, it would be my way or the highway. Okay? They see the world in black and white. You're either with me or against me. You're either evil or good. Okay? You're either right or you're wrong. Now, people who think in this way, they tend to be on the right. They tend to support fundamentalist religious belief systems, of course, and they tend to support hierarchy in the sense of, some people are above others, and that's the way that it should be, and that's the way that it always will be, and that's just fine, okay? Because again, a hierarchical system gives clear distinctions, all right? There's no blurring of boundaries. Now, there's research about how authoritarians reason, And it shows that they tend to be more defensive and emotional about their beliefs, less likely to change their minds, more likely to use quick-fire emotional processes, or what are called heuristics, to figure out what they think about situations. Also, some studies I talk about in the book showing that these right-wing authoritarians are more likely to engage in selective exposure to sources of information that agree with them. And of course, we know that conservatives opt for Fox News much more strongly than liberals opt for any channel. All right, there's a study done by political scientists at Stanford showing that Democrats and independents, giving them the choice of media, they don't like Fox. They definitely don't like Fox, but they spread their interests around all kinds of different things. But Republicans overwhelmingly choose Fox for hard news, even for soft news, like travel news, they won't read Fox. All right? And they found that the probability that a Republican would choose a CNN or NPR report was just about 10%. So then let's look at what Fox News viewers believe, right? And it turns out that in the book I talk about 7 studies showing that Fox News viewers believe wrong things, right? And that Fox, in some cases, increases their wrong beliefs. And this is, of course, we always would say this is because Fox misinforms you. Look at all this nonsense about global warming. They're sowing doubt about global warming. No wonder Fox News viewers don't believe in global warming. But what I'm saying is that it's also happening because of something about who they are to begin with. They're the kind of people that need Fox. Okay? So it's a feedback loop. Fox is misinforming them. Fox is giving them bad information, but they're selecting into the information stream because they want it. All right? So it's both. And just as there is something about conservatives that make them need something like Fox and need to cling to their beliefs, isn't there something about liberals that makes them sort of like facts and make them want to self-select into some kind of habit like Fox watching but not, or some kind of lifestyle that would make them more open to facts? Well, of course there is. Okay? Liberals are the kind of people that not only go to universities, but they never want to leave. All right? They stay there. They think this is great. Conservatives are like, I'm going to the business community and I'm making some money. All right? Liberals are like, oh, let's get let's do a dissertation. And the evidence is overwhelming that academia is a liberal place and science is a liberal place. So members of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, they are 6% Republican. 6%, all right? And people say, science is so biased. No, it's the nature of things, all right? College professors are 14% Republican. 15% of liberals today have advanced degrees, vastly more than the percent among conservatives. It leads to this quotation from the sociologist of academia, Neil Gross: more so than ever before, the highly educated comprise a key constituency for American liberalism and the Democratic Party, one that may have surpassed a crucial threshold level in size. All right? This is one of the big dividers. So if we go back to my dump of data, I already showed you that a lot of the reason the conservatives deny what's true is their lack of openness, but the denial is probably not only caused by that, it probably also lives over here as well. Lack of higher education, not staying. Now, I'm not talking about getting a bachelor's degree. I'm talking about staying and getting an advanced degree and getting used to the norms of the scientific process and the scientific community and getting really to feel like those are your people. Those are the kind of people that you feel comfortable with, and you're not going to fly in the face of what they say because you trust how they do things. Okay? That's the real difference. And of course, this has gotten worse because conservatives now attack academia, so they tell their people, don't trust them. All right? So that's a sociological effect that goes on top of what I'm calling a kind of nature, human nature effect. So it all adds up to conservatives believing a lot of wrong stuff. All right? So when Stephen Colbert said, reality has a well-known liberal bias, he said it right to George W. Bush at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. It was hilarious, right? But it was also true. And it was true and it was part of the nature of things. It's what you would expect to see in a political system organized by human beings. All right? That's what I'm saying. And we could cite poll after poll to show that it's true. And the book has got every kind of poll that I could find that shows that it's true. But I'll just give you 3. 64% of Republican voters in the 2010 election thought it was not clear whether President Obama had been born in the United States. 55% of authoritarians versus just 19% of non-authoritarians believed that Saddam Hussein had been directly involved in the 9/11 attacks. Only 18% of Republicans and Tea Party members accept the scientific consensus that global warming is caused by human beings. You could go on, but there's not much need. None of this means that liberals can't be wrong. All right, I want to emphasize that. In fact, the science of ideology helps us understand when liberals will be wrong. All right? Okay? And when conservatives are going to be at their most wrong and their most dogged about it. Because there's another whole facet of this research that I haven't introduced yet, but that's very important, about their moral differences. In other words, their emotions bias them to see moral or political situations differently, and this has been studied. And so when that's done, it turns out that conservatives tend to be more hierarchical in their morality. In other words, they think that it's okay for systems to be less equal. Okay, so they don't have such a problem with people being divided up based upon race, sexual persuasion, gender, all the rest, and not getting the same rights or the same opportunities on that basis. They're cool with that. Okay, liberals are like, what? But they're also more individualistic in their morality, and that individualism is the view that government shouldn't get involved. In other words, you get ahead in this world or you fall behind in this world based upon your own merits, and nobody should interfere with that, least of all the government. Liberals are more communitarian. They believe that we're all in it together, and we've got society has to step in, government has to step in to protect the weak, protect the disadvantaged. All right? So Republicans in this research are hierarchical individualists. Democrats or liberals are communitarian egalitarians. And this predicts when the groups will go wrong and be most biased. And the reason it does that is because this predicts when they'll be most emotional about issues. So how do you get an egalitarian communitarian to believe a false thing? All you have to do is tell them a story that appeals to their values, but the facts are wrong. So what kind of story is that going to be? It's going to be a story where a big corporation did something wrong. That's kind of the perfect story, right? Because they're egalitarians, all right? So they're distrustful of these big concentrations of power, people that have more wealth than other people. Okay, corporations are the great example of that. And they're communitarians. So if you say this corporation is hurting people who cannot help themselves, and government's got to do something about it, and we've got to right this wrong, okay? Because we've got someone in power harming people who are not in power, all right? Except that the facts are wrong, then that's when they'll believe it. So what is a story like that? Vaccination, all right? The idea that pharmaceutical companies are causing young children to have autism by injecting them with needles that were meant to protect them, okay? But in fact, they're causing an epidemic and gigantic human suffering on a generational scale, all right? Through their negligence, through their irresponsibility. That's the claim that the vaccine denialists make. And it's a claim that's clearly designed to appeal to liberalism, right? And there are many other sorts of claims that would fit into this quadrant as opposed to being in this quadrant. So that's where the left can be wrong, and it will be wrong sometimes, all right? But the reason it doesn't get as wrong, all right, is because more open-mindedness and because of this alliance with scientists, right? You don't want to cross them. So if they come out and say it's wrong in this area, then it causes like psychological pain for the left. All right, and then you get this whole schism, and the left is less obedient anyway because it's less authoritarian. So, you end up having these fights, and you end up getting somewhere closer to the truth. All right, and you don't see the same mainstreaming of misinformation. So let me sum up where we are so far. Science describes reality. Human beings are really good at screwing this up. All right, all the time. We know this, but what I'm saying is that some human beings may be a little bit more than others. Now, we still need to communicate science. We need to get across what's true, all right? But, it would help to know what we're dealing with when we're trying to get information through certain kinds of people, all right? And it would help to know that scientifically. And if you ever want to have a more functional politics, I don't think you can ignore that the left and the right process information in deeply different ways, right? All right? How are you going to get through if you kind of just pretend that that's not true? Pretend that everybody in politics is a blank slate. And in fact, there's much more research that's going forward now. The most fascinating stuff, and this is the last study I'll mention, is physiological research. So it turns out that liberals and conservatives have different responses automatically to different kinds of stimuli, different kinds of images. So at the Political Physiology Laboratory, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, they strap them in eye tracker devices, or they strap them in skin conductance measurements. How much, do your skin glands moisten, which is a sign of your sympathetic nervous system getting aroused, when you see a picture of, say, a man with his mouth full of maggots, all right? Or, other things that elicit fear or disgust. Conservatives have these really, really strong reactions. Either the skin conductance is higher than liberals, or the eyes dart really quickly to the scary or disgusting images and stay there for longer. All right? Versus liberals, they're like in the collage, they're looking at like a happy bunny rabbit. All right? So this stuff is automatic, and it appears to be deeply embedded so much that it's part of automatic physiological responses. So I know you're all wondering, okay, fine. You show me all this. You ascribe politics to core human nature and differences between people. Now, how on earth am I supposed to communicate with a conservative? Or a religious conservative, right? You know, an authoritarian fundamentalist. I've just told you that it's like the hardest person to communicate with. And yeah, that actually is what I'm telling you, right? And it's not at all clear that that should be your goal. But, I mean, we have limited time in our lives, all right? So if you're going to do this, what are you going to do? And again, I'm not saying that I advise it. I think that you have to be very careful about the audience you're trying to reach, and you have to think about whether it's actually possible to do so. But let's say that you're like masochistic and you want to try this. Well, what do you not do? What do you never ever do? All right? You do not argue facts. You do not argue logic. All right? You don't make your case rationally. That's the worst possible thing to do. All right? Okay? Liberals are in this enlightenment mode because they're like, they've been through academia and they like how science works, and they think that we'll just add up enough facts and then like through overwhelming force they'll capitulate. All the motivated reasoning research suggests the opposite. It suggests that, you know, they will double down, and as they become more educated, they'll become better at doubling down. All right? That's what I think you should expect. So if this doesn't work, if basically everything that, you know, people of reason have tried for, you know, decades or longer is mispremised based upon what people of reason themselves have found out through psychological research, which seems to be the case, right? We've been going about it all wrong. Then what does work? Well, you know, Paul mentioned it a little bit. Science shows that framing works. All right? There's actually some people in, you know, atheism, skepticism, blogging who attack framing. They're completely off base, and they're off base in a way that's so extreme that it's hard to know what to begin to say about it. But, you know, the scientific research shows clearly in the literature that if you frame issues differently, you can get different responses and you can open conservatives up. All right? So what is a frame? You can think of a frame as an organizational device for managing the complexity of an issue, because every issue is complex. You can't talk about all aspects of it, especially if you're going to have a message, because then you just be disorder, chaos, right? You'll get nothing across. Paul is right about this, of course. So you frame, and what that means is you put forward one aspect of the topic, and that's to the detriment of all the others. You're not being dishonest. Nobody can communicate everything. You're just choosing what part you're going to talk about. And the reason that framing matters is because, especially if you frame around moral values, then you will have very, very different impacts on the left and the right based upon which emotional buttons you push. All right? So, you know, if the conservatives are hierarchs, the conservatives are individualists. We saw that. So if you attack individualism, forget about it. All right? But if you actually say something that seems framed so that it supports individualism or hierarchy, and by the way, it's very hard to frame something pro-hierarchy, so I'm not sure that I would advise that. But then it will open their minds. And we have, again, published scientific research that shows that this works. So, for instance, here's a framing experiment that works. Dan Kahan at Yale had people read, it's again this fake newspaper article, Paradigm. It's the same text. It's about global warming. It says global warming is real and caused by humans in the text. Scientists found this out. Okay, that's what scientists always find out. The framing is the title. All right, it's the first thing you read, and it's the thing that shapes your whole emotional response because it's the first thing you read. So your emotions fire. And in one case, the science is framed to attack individualism because it says scientific panel recommends anti-pollution solution to global warming. Okay, that means the government steps in. That means the government gets involved and regulates. And okay, conservatives are like, get out of here. Right? As soon as they read that from the title. But then they give them the other frame. Scientific panel recommends nuclear solution to global warming. Suddenly, and both answers are consistent with the basic science, right? Neither contradicted. Nuclear, conservatives think of as the free market, although actually sometimes it's subsidized. But, you know, they think of this as actually the kind of thing they support. It's individualistic. It's people going out and trying to succeed through making money, through innovation. Okay, that's cool. So what response do you get? Okay, this closes minds. This opens minds among conservatives. You can do similar things to get similar effects with liberals if you know what their values are. And we know why, because if we go back to our chart, we know Republicans live up here, we know Democrats live down here, and we know that if you frame it in the Al Gore, polar bears are going to die way, then you're down here. And conservatives don't like stuff down here, all right, emotionally. But if you stick it up here and suddenly you got your nuclear power plants, then you've done some mind opening. So you can communicate to conservatives. They're susceptible to framing, okay? Science shows. They also listen to trusted authorities. They are, after all, authoritarian, okay? The problem is getting one of their authorities to speak to them because it ain't you, all right? And it ain't the people that you like. They're also probably, and I don't think this has been tested, but it stands to reason that different styles of conveying your message is probably going to make a big difference. So they're going to want decisive, clear statements, no wishy-washy, all right? And liberals and scientists are all about the wishy-washy, all right? On the one hand, on the other hand. You know, one member of Congress famously said, "Can somebody please give me a one-handed scientist so that they will not say on the one hand, on the other hand anymore?" All right? So that's what you don't do. So these are some things that might work. It does not mean communicating is going to be easy, because Fox News is always going to have a much louder megaphone than you, all right? And that's the problem. We can do these closed psychological experiments and we can get effects that are statistically significant that suggest that minds are opening. But that's in a closed experiment. You go into the chaos of modern communication and it's not clear that you can control anything anymore, right? And if Rush Limbaugh says it and if Fox News says it, then you guys are not going to matter. That's the problem. And that's why, again, you got to think strategically about whether you want to do this. But in an interpersonal conversation, framing strategies will also, I think, be effective. Nevertheless, it's clear that the science of ideology casts a profound light on all strategies of communication. And tons more could be said about that, but I've already gone on for long enough, so I will stop. In conclusion, I want to leave you with some, I think, profound words of wisdom from a great philosopher, Yoda. Yoda said, "You must unlearn what you have learned." And when it comes to why people deny science, why people deny facts about the world, why people have different ideologies, and how you reach people different from yourself, that is exactly the situation that we are in. Thank you. So, and we do need more research on this. So, all right. Any questions?
Okay, I started in the front and came around this way, so I'm going to start in the back and go this way for this time. There you go.
All right. I don't remember hearing this at all during addressing your presentation, but what about folks who do change their ideology as their lives goes on? I used to be much more conservative, Republican, and as I grew older, became far more progressive and liberal. I don't consider myself a Democrat, just an independent. Dennis Miller, the comedian, he's gone from liberal to conservative. I mean, people have gone many ways, so how does that factor into all this research?
Well, I think that it's assumed by the research that that can happen, because and we know from the real world that it does happen. So what's going on there is that, first of all, human nature clearly explains part of politics, and it probably acts through personality, like I said. But it doesn't explain all of politics. The correlations between openness and liberalism are not perfect. For instance, there's going to be clearly closed-minded liberals and open-minded conservatives, and conscientious liberals, I'm one. Okay, I score really high on the order structure thing. And non-conscientious, so it doesn't predict it perfectly. So you would expect all kinds of people who don't fit that. You would also expect all kinds of blends. Like, what is someone who's medium on conscientious and medium on open? Maybe a centrist, probably sometimes. But then you have the political winds blowing in all kinds of different ways. All right, so events, all right, can activate people and push them. And if you're a blend, let's say that you have egalitarian impulses, but you've got individualistic impulses. All right, let's say certain events occur. An event that, for instance, activated really strong liberal emotions, Hurricane Katrina. Let's take a centrist, and let's have Hurricane Katrina happen. And you have government failing, and you got people suffering, all right? And you got looking like nobody can fix the problem, and you're seeing all this pain, and your emotions of empathy are being activated. Maybe this centrist, in that moment moves a little left. But, let's take a liberal like me, and let's attack the United States by flying planes into the World Trade Center. And maybe that liberal thinks, you know what? I don't have time for this wishy-washy, indecisive stuff. I want a strong leader who is going to fight back and defend this country. All right? Certainly that is what happened to me, actually. It happened to a lot of people. So, nothing to say that people can't move, but I am saying that personality predicts politics in aggregate quite well. Yeah.
So it really, everything you said, definitely it makes sense. But this conversation I've been having in my own head the entire time with myself is pretty much categorizing every interaction I've had with someone who is basically conservative or just religious, and it totally makes sense. It's like fish talking to birds, practically.
Right, apples talking to oranges.
You can't really go anywhere, you just tread water. And you mentioned it's basically arguing against DNA. So would you say this could be, it's a genetic predisposition to being conservative, or is this something like gene expression through nurture that would make someone more likely to be either liberal
Well, it would
or
be both.
conservative?
It would be both. I mean,
Of course.
genes only make proteins, they don't make Republicans, right? So, but apparently, and I didn't talk about the genetic research, right? Genetics shows that personality is inherited, all right? Those big 5 traits are inherited, and they show up across cultures, right? So they seem to be human nature. It's like a knob. You turn the openness knob, you turn the conscientious knob. Everybody's, got a different setting on the knob. And genes are clearly doing a lot to control that, all right? That doesn't mean that genes are the only thing. I don't believe in free will. But it doesn't make me a genetic determinist, okay? Because genes are doing some of the determining, but there's everything else in the world that's not genes that are like all the inputs to my body from outside. I'm totally determined by all of that, but it isn't just the genes.
You and
right?
Sam Harris must get along pretty well, then.
No, he hates me. I don't know if he hates me, but he's certainly attacked me. Because I think new atheists communicate all wrong based on all this, right? So new atheists don't like what I say about that. Of course, the science is on my side, but yeah. Did I answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
I don't think that, do you think the framework, the frames, do you think they're a little bit deceptive? I don't, but I don't know if I would be comfortable trying to, it's not deceptive at all, but I would feel a little bit like I am trying to deceive them in order to, kind of, yeah.
Why?
To meet an end, because it's worded differently, and it says the same things, but it's arousing their psychology. Is there any way that we can just?
I don't know that it's that different from in a communication. If you try to figure out where someone is before you try to actually get something across to them, or else you're going to fail. Right? I mean, you're
Right.
just trying to figure out where the person is starting from.
Right.
I mean, we do that all
makes
the
sense,
time
yeah.
in non-political contexts.
Is there any way that we can be completely neutral on any
No.
No.
You can't. No, because people don't understand facts outside of frames. All right? We think in frames or narratives, right? There's no neutral, all right? Because information doesn't have meaning outside of a context, right? And so as soon as you start to provide a context, then it signifies things to different people, right? So I don't think that there can be information without some sort of reason that, I'm telling you this for some reason, right? I mean, otherwise you could just spit out random data, but no one would listen to you, or you would be a curiosity, right? I mean,
Yeah, and I guess that's the structure of our language.
yeah, I don't see how it happens, right?
It seems to me that conservative and liberal are ideological terms that apply uniquely to democracies. And I'm wondering if there is collaborative research from other areas of the world.
Well, it's
where-
harder, but yeah, that's a great question, but I think it doesn't apply only to democracies, but the psychological research is largely in democracies. I actually have a slide, and the reason is that it's easier to do the research, not that these things don't show up in other countries. You know, I got asked about, what's up with Europe when I was talking about this in Germany, of course. And so, here's some studies where actually, in the first one, the samples were from the UK, Germany, Poland, Italy, Scotland, and Sweden, in addition to the US, showing these correlations between left, right, and
But those are
personality.
democracies, right?
Right, this is all still democracies, right?
Yeah.
The second one, well, actually, they're all mostly like that. But what I'm saying is that this works well for Europe. Now, they're democracies. So what happens in Eastern countries and what happens in non-democratic countries? And that's the tough question. What I argue in the book, and what a lot of people have argued, is that, let's do communism as our example, is that if you have a totalitarian communist regime that is basically authoritarian, then we argue that left and right flip, okay? Because the psychological right becomes attached to the totalitarian left. In other words, under Stalin. So you would have hardliners who are rigid, authoritarian, all the rest, actually supporting status quo and resistance to change, but their beliefs are not, right-wing. They're actually theoretically egalitarian and all the rest. So it becomes, and versus the free thinkers in that country want a free market system, and they want more liberty. So it gets all messed up. But we would argue that makes sense because personality and psychological need doesn't actually have any specific content to it.